Welcome to another round of coffee and donuts. I'm Frank Magaha. If you don't know who I am, I'm a former federal law enforcement officer, now a full-time law enforcement instructor. And this is where I answer your questions about the police hiring process or the career in total. Let's discuss. Before we get started, listen, we answer all questions that come across either YouTube, and we're trying to get to all our questions on all our other platforms and socials now as well. If you want your question answered, you can leave them over there, or you can leave them now in our blog, which is at our website, armageddonct.com. Any questions left in our blog or any questions left on YouTube, we answer immediately, and we answer those first. So, now, I have 3 pre-submitted questions. Let's jump into it. First one. Question: if your work background is more suited around law enforcement, such as being a volunteer firefighter or security guard, and have good work experience, is it looked at more favorably as it is similar to being a police officer? Yes and no. Firefighter, yes, especially if you're a paid firefighter, because that means you're already a government employee. If you're a volunteer firefighter, that still looks good as well. Security guard, it just depends. Now, what I will say is, yes, those are really good positions for employment, and you can leverage, specifically when you're articulating your experiences, you can leverage those experiences for your interviews to correlate with law enforcement. One thing I'm very adamant about with security guards and security officers, whether you're armed or unarmed, doesn't matter, is the fact is don't ever try to sell it as, hey, I do the same job. Law enforcement officers hate that. We always hated it when they came through interviews and said, yeah, I know exactly what it's like to be a police officer. I work security as it. Not even remotely close to the same position in regards to your day-to-day activities. Now, the core fundamentals, following a similar vertical structure, the job is intent for protection of either assets or personnel. They have very similar kind of responsibilities and tools that they use, but you leverage those experiences. Hey, how do you think being a security guard has helped you with or would help you in your law enforcement career? Sure, yes, we have really good radio communications, or I leverage radio communications. I understand it might not be exactly similar as law enforcement, but I am competent and I have good radio communications, as well as I have training and assets in different various non-lethal, such as handcuffing, OC spray, different yada, 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 yada. That's the way I would use that. Same with firefighting. I'd leverage the aspect that, hey, yeah, I deal with high risk, highly intense situations. I deal with a lot of de-escalation for individuals. I deal with a lot of trauma. All those things, those are this type of stuff, medical assistance, stuff like that. Those are the things that I would leverage in using those. But I wouldn't just go in and say, yeah, I do very similar work. I'm a security officer, or I'm a firefighter. No, don't do that. Make sure you're always coming across as the humble professional. Even if you do have a lot of experience in life, firefighter, EMT, reserve deputy, you're applying for a position, all right? You're still applying for employment. Be the humble professional. Understand that even working from one department to another department is different, right? There's multiple different avenues, even going from a patrol officer to a detective. That is significantly different, and they're both in law enforcement. But you don't just say, oh, I'm a patrol officer, tomorrow I want to be a detective. No, it doesn't work like that. You got to apply, and they got to make sure that you're the best fit for it. It's the same aspect. So imagine if you're coming in from a different career and then going into law enforcement in a patrol position, or a patrol officer, or patrol deputy, anything along. And that applies for corrections too. Corrections is still in law enforcement, but at the same point in time, it's not the same as patrol. So yes, I do think it would help, but it all depends on how you articulate it and how you sell your experiences, not necessarily the positions. So, next one. Hello, I'm currently conducting my PHS for my department. Only issue I'm having is with job experience regarding old supervisors. I have supervisors listed for jobs I attended within the past 8 years, but jobs I worked at when I was 18 years old, almost 10 years ago, I do not have any of that information. Is it suitable to leave those supervisors blank, or how would I go about that information if I genuinely have no information to give? Any help would be great. Sure. Never leave anything blank, because it's it's just going to delay your process, right? When I say never, if something's supposed to be left blank, then leave it blank. But when it comes to this is where that preparation phase, comes to aspect. This is where rubber meets the road. This is where the work ethic really needs to shine through. Getting all this done specifically before you're even in the PHS process is my recommendation. But now that you're in it, you're on a time limit. So you're going to go in, you're going to go through, you're going to try to remember everyone that you can. Go through old phone contacts if you still have it, and list those individuals down. Try to reach out to them first. Say, hey, I'm applying for a position that requires a background check. They're asking me to list old supervisors from this time. I wanted to see if you're okay with being listed. If they say no, I no longer work there, that's fine. Go contact, if you can't get anyone to be the reference, go contact the organization. Contact them and get a hold of their HR, their human resources department, and then list someone from the human resources department and the human resource number. And then that way they can provide a work reference for you in that position. And that applies both for either a supervisor or a work colleague if you need it. Specifically if you say, if you didn't have a work colleague, who do you list? Right? You would do that. Now, if you're self-employed, it's a little bit different, but for the same point, that's how I would do it. I always go, if I can't find anyone, or I can't recall anyone, or I can't get a hold of anyone to confirm information, because the last thing you want to do is, I have this old supervisor's number, but it's not. It's someone new. They got a new phone number. They moved to a new state. None of that information is accurate. So I would go in, I would go to HR, even call the main office number. Say, hey, this is so-and-so, I'm former employee there. I'm filling out a background packet for new employment. They're asking me for work contact information for this organization. Is there anyone you recommend I put down? And then hopefully they'll give you someone. If not, then you just list whoever you talk to and the HR number. All right. This is a really good question, and one I see a lot of people run into, and a major one for slowing down the hiring process. So make sure you're putting a lot of emphasis on getting this stuff done prior to starting your PHS if you can. If you're already in that process, just do your best. Use the tips and tricks that we're sharing here to try and get through faster, and make sure you get your PHS in on time. All right, last question. I currently work with a few LEOs, for those that's law enforcement officers, on a regular basis for the last 3 years. Would it be a good idea to ask for letters of recommendation? If so, how would I include those during the hiring process? I really appreciate your videos. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes and no. And so 3 years, okay, that's good. But in what context do you know them? Do you guys work private security together? Because it's saying you work with them. So do you work in the department? And if you work in the department already, there's a lot of unknown here. But here's what I will say about using law enforcement officers as references. I would never use I shouldn't say never. That's not true. I would be cautious about using a law enforcement officer as a reference in that department if you don't know their standing, right? Just because a law enforcement officer works there doesn't mean that they're the best employee ever, right? Maybe they call out all the time. Maybe they're not held with the highest regard, right? So if you use that officer that works at that department and they're not considered the best, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot. Now, if you could use those officers for different departments, yeah, I would say that. As for letter of recommendations, I don't think those are absolutely necessary just for a baseline law enforcement officer. If you have a chief of police or a congressman or someone like a police captain, someone of kind of executive level willing to write you a letter of recommendation, absolutely, I think you should get this. But here's one thing I want to make sure. Whenever you're doing a letter of recommendation, make sure the person actually has a relationship with you. I've seen people submit letters of recommendation from congressmen, and then you call up to confirm it, and they say, hey, I have no idea who you're talking about, because they just wrote a general letter of recommendation because they knew someone who knew somebody. That actually hurts you. It doesn't help you, right? Because you try to use this really big, kind of brand name politician to do something, or chief of police or something, and they're like, wait, who did I write this one for? And then they don't recall it, and you're trying to use this person as a reference. What I would say is I would talk to those LEOs, see if they're willing to be a reference for you, and then do that. But once again, I'd also be cautious about applying to their departments, right, and using them as a reference. Not unless you know them really well and you know they're an outstanding individual and they're really respected by their department. I would be cautious. And you could use them for other departments, as I said. But yeah, it's kind of a catch-22. You need to be careful. That's kind of what I'm getting at with it. But I hope this helps. Listen, once again, if you want your question answered, you can either leave it in any of our platforms. We'll try to get to it. But we always answer all the questions here on YouTube or over in our blog. So if you want to go over, check out our blog. So we have a bunch more information in there, not just for police hiring, but for academy and career success. Go ahead, leave us a comment over there. We'll respond to it immediately. I hope this helps. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.